Hey Brooklyn Book Bodega families! Hope you're well and enjoying a number of great stories at home right now. My name is Kelsey and I'm the founder of Malty the Blue Tiger. We provide bilingual books and audiobooks to help support the development of kids' language and literacy skills. Speaking of which, that's something that's top of mind for a lot of families right now. When kids are out of school, whether it's during the traditional school year or let's say over summer break, how do you keep them learning at home, sharpening their reading skills, and growing as avid readers? Today, I'm going to give you 5 easy strategies to get more out of the story time you're already having at home without it feeling like homework for your kids. These tips will help boost their reading skills and their love of books. So let's get started. Tip number 1, ask new questions during story time. But try to ask questions that don't involve a yes or no answer. I'm going to use a few examples from Malty the Blue Tiger, but you can of course ask these questions with any book that you're reading at home. So in Malty the Blue Tiger, Malty is criticized for the sound of her roar, so she tries to mimic the sounds of other animals and characters throughout the book until she realizes that her roar brings something unique and powerful to the world. On this page, she's trying to chirp like 3 yellow birds, and as you can imagine, it doesn't turn out too well. But you can ask your child questions like, what do you think is going through Malty's mind right now? What do you think is going through the minds of the birds? How might this scene play out differently if it happened in a city? Why do you think the author included this page in the book to begin with? These questions all build your child's understanding of perspective, setting, and author's purpose, which will boost their reading and writing skills for years to come. This is important because in school, they won't just be expected to remember information from text, whether it's a social studies text, language arts text, or science text. They'll be expected to analyze that information and draw conclusions from it, which is exactly what these types of questions help them do from an early age. Speaking of which, a lot of the tips that I'm providing today have to do with story time, but that doesn't need to end once your child becomes an independent reader. In fact, a lot of experts recommend that you continue reading to your kids because it helps expose them to texts that might be beyond their level and new vocabulary. It also gives you a sense of what they struggle with and what they thrive at as readers. Tip number 2, build vocabulary through repetition. If you're already reading at home to your kids, you're doing a fantastic job of exposing them to new vocabulary. In fact, a study from the Ohio State University found that kids who are read to 5 times per day will hear an extra 1.5 million words by the time they turn 5. Kids who are read to even once a day will hear an extra 296,000 words by the time they turn 5, and it's okay if books are repeated. This is important because the words that your child hears in a storybook are very different from the words that they might hear in everyday conversation. While the language that we use in everyday conversation is short and directive, like, hey, go over there, or sit down, the language that they hear in a storybook is more complex and uses more advanced vocabulary. For instance, in a storybook, they might hear a sentence like, Malty was fascinated by the stupendous dancing birds. Enhance the vocabulary your child learns in a storybook by having what's called extra textual talk. This is when you discuss a book with kids after reading it, the next day at breakfast, or in the car. This reinforces what they've learned from the story and helps them understand how its vocabulary is used in everyday life. Another great strategy for helping your child learn vocabulary words is relabeling household items. This is particularly helpful if your child is learning a new language and you want them to be able to recognize nouns instantly. However, it also works if you're just working in new vocabulary in their native language too. So let's say your child just learned the words gigantic and fascinating in a book. You can create labels like gigantic crayons or fascinating books to help them be exposed to those new words on the daily. Tip number 3, try choral reading. Don't worry, this doesn't involve singing. Choral reading is a technique in which you read a passage of text out loud with your child. This is something that's used with teachers and small groups of students in class, but you can also use it at home. Choral reading boosts your child's reading fluency, which is the ability to read at a proper pace, so not too slow or too fast, with expression and accurately. Choral reading is so effective for boosting your child's reading fluency because you can set the pace of the read aloud, and they'll mimic your speed and your expression. You can also use this with an audiobook that kids read along with. One note on this though is to use a book that your child is already familiar with. That way they're not using energy trying to decode new words or understand the story. This should be done with a text they're familiar with so they can focus on reading fluency and reading along with you. Tip number 4, get theatrical. You've probably already heard that it's really important to get into the books that you're reading to kids, but here's why. Not only does it keep them engaged in the story that you're reading and provides a good example of reading fluency, which again includes expression, but it helps provide context for vocabulary words that they're still learning. For example, let's say your child has heard the word terrified once or twice before. If it comes along in a story, you could say something like, Malty was terrified. Or you could also say a sentence like this in the same way, Malty was excited. On the other hand, if you really ham it up and say something like, Malty was terrified. I know it feels a little silly, but that provides context for your child as to what that vocabulary word means. So they'll either remember its definition or they'll be able to decipher it based on your tone of voice. This will really help their reading comprehension skills in the long run. Tip number 5, reread the books they love. You're probably already doing this at home, but maybe you've wondered if your child is really getting anything out of rereading the same book for the 100th time. The good news is they are, and here's why. First of all, rereading books helps kids move beyond the basic understanding of the plot to improving their fluency and comprehension of the nuances in the story. It also gives them practice in quickly decoding certain words, which helps with reading comprehension. Secondly, it helps kids build connections with the characters in a book. This is also why finding a series that your child loves is really beneficial for their reading skills. Once they read the first book and learn about the characters, background, setting, and even the vocabulary associated with the topic, they'll be able to dive into the subsequent books more easily, and this boosts their confidence as growing readers. Finally, letting kids return to the books they love really fine-tunes their interests as readers. So, in school they're usually assigned reading, but at home they can really choose what they want to read. And this is an important part of helping them grow into avid readers, even if that means returning to the same book about the solar system or dragons over and over and over again. I hope you find these tips useful for supporting literacy at home. Share this video with someone who's raising a reader, and be sure to visit www.maltythebluetiger.com for more language and literacy resources. Thanks for joining, and happy reading!